SnapJelly, and I was originally not planning on reviewing this fight. Honestly, because the reason I wasn't planning on reviewing it is because I enjoyed it quite a lot, actually. There's a lot of quote-unquote unrealisticness about this fight, or this sparring match essentially, but in terms of choreography, compared to most fights in Game of Thrones, this fight is honestly really good, so I didn't really feel like bashing it that much as I usually do with other fights. But you guys kept asking for it, so here it is, the sparring match between Arya and Brienne of Tarth. Now, some things that I want to mention first. One of those things is that in my previous video that I did about Arya Stark's sword specifically, this one right here, there was some confusion about her sword, and that is if it was sharp or not. Now to that I want to say that we see her cut in the show with this sword multiple times before. We see her cut off a pigeon's head in one slice, we see her cut a candle, so the sword is supposed to be sharp, although based on its size it's not going to have much cutting power. But it is sharp nonetheless. Now something else that I want to say is that it is a lot smaller than I thought it was when I made that video. I stick to my points that I made in that video, but I just want to mention that it is quite a bit smaller and thinner than I remember. So yeah, without wasting any more time, let's begin. So right from the bat, Brienne swings her sword, Arya parries, and brings her point in line for a thrust. Now, can you do that? Arya's left-handed, so she parries like this, having the longsword of Brienne glance off like that, and then brings her point in for a thrust. Can you do that? Yes, sure, why not? Personally, I wouldn't really recommend it in this case, because there's a lot of excessive movement, if you think about it. Because Arya Stark's sword has some cut potential, but not that much cutting potential, if she accidentally gets too close, then she has to bring her arm back way too far in order to get a stab in this way. Whilst if you do this with a sword that has a bit more cutting power, if you get too close then you won't go in for a stab, but you just cut the head. And that is still very dangerous. But in this case with needle, that would just leave a little scratch. Also, she's using a sharp sword for a sparring match. Why? Don't. It's dangerous. But could you do this? Yeah, I mean, you can do it with a saber. If you use a saber like this, right? And an attack comes in from the side, you parry like this with the point down and attack like that. Oop, in one smooth movement you can do that. But again, then you go in for a cut. With Arya, you have to parry like this, then bring your shoulder and your arm back and stab. So you do 2 extra movements, so it's not that quick. Although most longsword fighters in Game of Thrones are excessively slow, so I guess it doesn't matter in this case. But you could do it, yeah, just parry like this, strike like that, other side, parry like this, strike like that. Yeah, you can do it. I would say though, that in terms of practicality, it would be better for her to just do an ordinary parry riposte. Like this, just have the sword clash down on her guard, as small as it may be, and just stab simultaneously. And just like that, Brienne would be dead. Now, you guys might say, but a longsword would be way stronger than needlesword, it will just slice through. No, it won't. Okay, for some reason, people believe that as steel gets thinner and smaller, it all of a sudden also becomes softer. It does not. If you whack a huge block of steel with a sword, nothing happens. If you whack a small piece of steel with a sword, nothing happens. It's still steel. You cannot cut through steel. With that being said, let's continue. So Arya does some fancy dodges. Can you do those in real life? In theory, yes. In actual practice, probably not. In theory you could do that, in theory you can be fast enough to do that, but the chances of you actually pulling it off are so small that you might as well parry. Parrying is a lot easier to do. So it's a bit of a movie trope, you know, quick dodging, stuff like that. And there's supposed to be, I believe, in this fight, a one big bulky guy versus a very small girl, versus a very small and quick one. So personally, I don't really mind it. I think it looks cool, and at least it's reasonable speed. So I don't mind it, but in real life, I wouldn't recommend you try and pull that off. Now here's something that I don't get. First off, Arya's sword is sharp. And she actually hits Brienne. Arya, that's dangerous. Second thing is she actually hits Brienne, but Brienne's not hurt at all. That means because, well, Arya's sword, as light as it is, doesn't have much cutting power. Which Brienne's gloves are probably strong enough to stop her sword. I would think that Brienne would be experienced enough of a swordswoman, to not flinch because of that, because that's honestly what I think that happens here. Maybe Brienne didn't expect herself to be open, and Arya Stark, hits her in a blind spot, and, her Brienne not being aware that she was open, and she flinches. But to me, like at a certain point, as you gain skill as a swordsman, you kind of get over that flinch effect. The moment that you go, ooh, when an attack comes your way, you get over that. And I would feel like Brienne would have been over that already. So, two things that I think are strange. First off, Arya's actually hitting her with a sharp sword, and second thing is, it doesn't do anything, but Brienne flinches anyway. A bit weird, but alright. Some back and forth going on. Personally, there's nothing really that I want to comment on, except for the fact that Brienne is wearing armor, and she's fighting like she's not wearing armor, because she's blocking every attack. And as we just saw, because Arya hit Brienne's hand, and it didn't cut through her glove, so why would it cut through a plate armor? There's no way it's going to cut through a plate armor, so in fact there's no reason for Brienne to block these, otherwise, except for if she was fighting as if she wasn't wearing any armor. So that's something. Another thing is that Brienne, being more powerful, could easily push Arya's sword to the side, and that is just something that happens. First sets and then upsets and then stuff like that in sword fighting. But alright, that aside, the kick. After a while, after Brienne gets pushed back, she kicks Arya in the chest. I like that. That is honestly something that I think is really reasonable and logical, because you saw Brienne getting pushed back by Arya essentially, and Brienne has a huge reach advantage, so she should, make use of that and create more distance. As Arya comes too close, kick her away, boom, just like that. And in fact, I have done similar things before, never truly a kick, because in this case it's different because Arya is so small and Brienne is so tall. But if you kick, you expose your femoral artery, the artery on the inside of your leg, and you don't want that cut, because if that's cut, you die. But in this, I have had situations where, for example, sword and buckler fighting, if you press a buckler up against somebody's elbows, you lock his arms, right? And if you use a longsword and your opponent is sword and buckler, he is going to want to lock your elbows, because then you can't use your longsword anymore. So I have been in situations where somebody is getting too close for comfort, and I just decide to let go of my sword and push them back. So it's not a kick, but again, creating that distance essentially. So the kick is good. I like the kick. It's a nice touch. With the foot to your chest. Hard. So Arya gets up, does a little karate pose. Personally, it doesn't really do anything, but it looks cool. I'm not really bothered by that. And then the next parries that you kind of see over Sansa's shoulder, they don't look as good anymore, because it really seems like Arya is smacking Brienne's sword away. And looking at how thin Needle is, I don't think Needle would have, enough of a punch to be able to do that. So I think if you would use Needle against the Longsword, you would be mostly required to do kind of like glancing parries like she did in the beginning. But honestly, it just looks like some very basic choreography in this case. Just some very basic strikes and deflections. Nothing really noteworthy. That disarm looks hella weird. I don't know why she dropped the sword, because it honestly just looks like she just let go of it. Alright. Also, you see a good close-up of her sword for once, and then you see that it has a triangular cross-section, which means that it's not sharp on the sides. But we see her cut stuff with it, so it is supposed to be sharp on the sides. But it's not. But it is. So what is it, screenwriters? What's going on? And that's the end of the fight. Brienne grabs Arya's hand, gets in line for a thrust. Arya grabs her dagger and goes in for a, I guess, a throat cut. And that's the end. It's supposed to be a tie. Now, I want to say something about this, and that is the fact that I find it a really weird tie. I think what they try to achieve is something along the lines of, ooh, they're equal in strength, you know, something like that. But honestly, just looking at this scene, like the last scene, if they wouldn't have stopped, this wouldn't have been a tie. I feel like if Brienne would have finished her thrust, which she didn't do, of course, trying not to hurt Arya, but then Arya, with her tiny arms, would not have been close enough to be able to cut Brienne. So then Brienne would have won. Now Arya, being as skilled as a fighter as she is, would have probably known this and could have used her dagger instead of to attack Brienne, to parry the sword. At first, you know, as Brienne grabs Arya's right arm, Arya has the dagger. Let's grab a dagger. A dagger. Brienne grabs Arya's right arm. Arya draws the dagger, parries the sword, then goes down and stabs Brienne in the leg or in the crotch or something like that. And all of a sudden, Brienne is dead. Well, of course, it's a sparring match, so you wouldn't actually kill her, but, you know, in that case, Arya would have won. So, they wanted to end it in a tie, but I feel like this is a really weird way to end it in a tie, because so much could have happened in just this scene alone if they didn't just stop moving all of a sudden. So yeah. So that's basically all I wanted to say about this. Honestly, I like this fight a lot, and I've said it in the beginning and I want to say it again. It looks good. Just, it's quick, and there's a lot of stuff that you can't do in real life, and that doesn't make any sense or isn't practical, but, you know, the speed is there, the reasonable speed, I mean, not like the slow choreography that Game of Thrones usually has, and, you know, they show a balance between speed and strength, which, again, in real life combat isn't there so much, but at least not in this way. But, you know, personally, I'm not really bothered by it in this case. I like it. It shows a good balance. And in terms of choreography, this one is up there for Game of Thrones standards. So, I like it. I like the fight. If you stuck around this long, you might as well subscribe and also follow me on social media. Links are in the description below. And thank you for joining my quest, and I hope you'll join me in the next one. Bye, guys.